So the story that we're looking at this morning as we make our way to the cross with Jesus and visiting various places in that journey comes from Matthew chapter 26 this morning. Jesus has just spent an evening with his best friends, his followers, his disciples. They just finished the meal, and here's what Matthew 26 says. After singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "Tonight all of you will fall away because of me, for it's written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. After I have risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Well, Peter told him, "Even if everyone falls away because of you, I will never fall away." "Truly I tell you," Jesus said to him, "tonight, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Even if I have to die with you," Peter told him, "I will never deny you." And all the disciples said the same thing. On October 27th, 1962, if you know anything about 1962, the fall of 1962, most of you weren't there. Some of us were. We remember that at the time, tension was at an all-time high, especially between Russia and the United States. In the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Russian submarine, you'll see it here, the B-59, was patrolling international waters near Cuba. And again, the world was on the brink of nuclear war. The Soviet Union was discovered to have been putting ballistic missiles in our backyard. And the Russians weren't backing down. And because the Russians weren't backing down, the U.S. is making preparation to invade Cuba to get rid of those missiles. Well, as they're doing this, at the height of the tension, the U.S. Navy discovers this sub just off the coast of Cuba, also in our backyard. Well, the B-59, realizing that it had been discovered, takes a deep dive. This deep dive is in the Caribbean. The Caribbean was warmer waters than that sub was used to. The AC fails. Temperatures rise to about 120 degrees inside that sub. And the captain is convinced, based on his last communication with Moscow, that the U.S. and Russia are already at war. And he gives the order to launch a nuclear torpedo at the U.S. Navy. Now, Russian protocol had it that it took 3 people to decide to launch a nuclear strike. And so they took a vote. The captain of the sub voted yes. The political officer who was also on board voted yes. The commodore of the entire Russian fleet voted no. There was an argument on that sub at 120 degrees inside that sub, and that commodore never backed down. No. Well, because of the heat, because there was no AC, that sub had to come to the surface. And eventually it went back to Russia. 40 years after that incident, Russia essentially declassified the incident. We found out the name of that guy was Vasily Zakharov. And what we know about Zakharov is he was a commander, or he was a captain in the Russian Navy for years. He spent the next 30, 40 years in the Russian Navy. He died 4 years before that information was declassified, before the world knew his story. And as people peered into that story, they realized that this man basically saved the world by voting no, by standing up to those officers and voting no on that strike. One person said that at the most dangerous moment in human history, he took a stand. Now, we're looking this morning at a group of people that are on the precipice of what really is the most dangerous moment in the history of the world. But what went on in that submarine on October 27, 1962 has a lot to do with how we understand and how we view life right now. And it happens all the time. You see, many of us are constantly confronted in situations in which the heat is being turned up. And at any moment, we are ready to hit that panic button. We are ready to go nuclear. And for some of us, we're willing to go nuclear regardless of the consequences that are on the other end. We'll deal with it later, is how we do it. But this story this morning is going to help us understand how we're to think and what we do when the temperature goes up. How do we keep our finger from pressing that panic button? What do we do after we've pressed it? What hope is there for us? We've got the answer right in front of us this morning at the Mount of Olives.
Down from the bunch of olives, and they split in two, creating a great valley between. The Mount of Olives serves as a backdrop for all of Jerusalem's biblical history, and is a constant landmark for those visiting the holy city. Its gorgeous views allow a visitor to step back and imagine the past and the future of Jerusalem.
So throughout Lent, we are in a series in which we are visiting places of the Passion. And this morning we are visiting the Mount of Olives. We're walking with Jesus to the Mount of Olives. And as they walk, there's a disturbing conversation that takes place between Jesus and his disciples. Again, they've just finished their meal, they sing a song, and they're headed to the Mount of Olives. And yet it seems as though everybody, based on the conversation, understands something is not right. Something is happening. Now, the disciples aren't exactly sure what. But Jesus begins a conversation with him, and Jesus pinpoints for them what is about to take place. And what's interesting about what Jesus is talking about is catastrophe is on the way. Disaster is on the way. But he's not talking about himself. He's talking about his disciples. He's been talking about this moment for quite some time. This should not be unexpected, yet it is. Here's what Jesus has said already in the book of Matthew. Jesus began to point out to his disciples, again, this is months earlier to our situation this morning, but Jesus began to point out to his disciples it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and scribes, be killed, and be raised on the third day. And then he says it again. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised up. When Jesus says this, the disciples, they're not buying it. In fact, Peter immediately protests, and Jesus rebukes him on the spot. Like, no, this is going to happen. And then just days prior to this, they were in Bethany. And we talked about it last week. They're in Bethany at a meal, and pretty soon there's this woman who is pouring ointment. She's anointing Christ's head and his entire body. And this is what he says. She's been pouring this perfume on my body. She has prepared me for burial. And finally, just moments before this conversation, they've been in a meal. And as Jesus is presenting them with the wine, he says, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. The disciples have been told time and again that Jesus is going to die, that he's going to save his people from their sins. Jesus is on a mission, and that mission to earth is to save his people and die for his people. So as they make their way up to the Mount of Olives, they sense something is up. They sense something's not right, but Jesus knows, and his thoughts are not about what's in it for him and what's going to happen to him. He's thinking about what's going to happen to them. They're the ones who are on the brink of nuclear war, pushing the panic button. Disaster for them in their personal lives, for their own spiritual lives. Here's what Jesus says. Tonight all of you will fall away because of me, for it's written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of this flock will be scattered. Tonight, all of you are going to fall away. The language here is of temptation. It's actually tonight you will be caused to fall away. Something's going to happen, and in that moment, you are going to abandon me. You're leaving. You're gone. Think about what that means for Jesus to actually say this out loud. You're going to abandon me. He's given them grace in the bread and the wine. They've even sung a hymn of praise, a song of deliverance. And yet here in his conversation, at least in the moment, there's not going to be deliverance. There's going to be disaster. He's going to be alone. He's going to be abandoned by his best friends. And again, Peter's having none of it. We read it just moments ago. Jesus denied it months ago when he said it the first time, and now tonight he says it again. Even if everyone falls away because of you, I will never fall away. Even if I have to die with you, Peter told him, I will never deny you. And all the disciples chimed in, saying the same thing. Jesus says, you're all going to fall away. You're all going to abandon me. I'm going to be alone. And they all say, nope. Not us. That's not going to happen. We're not going to let that happen. Nope, not us. Well, you know what? This was them. This is us. You know what they're telling Jesus at this point? We don't need saving. We don't need your help. We don't need saving. We've got this. Jesus, take a seat. We can handle whatever you throw at us, whatever's coming at us. We can handle this. We've got everything under control. We can save ourselves. We, we've got the 5 better steps to a better life. We got the 4 good principles of running a great office. We got 3 steps to be a happier person. We've got this. Jesus is standing there saying, no, you're going to fall. You are going to go nuclear. Catastrophe is waiting for you. It's a pretty bleak, even in a dark moment, this is pretty bleak. Jesus is laying out the stakes. He's prepping them for what's coming. And you know what Jesus is after? Jesus is after their hearts. Because in the midst of it all, in the midst of a very disturbing and dark discussion, Jesus has a statement of hope. What is it that keeps them from going nuclear? What is it that when they go nuclear, they're going to have to hang their hats on? What are they going to hang on to? What is it? Has it been all the good times that they had with Jesus? Has it been all the great stuff that they've seen Jesus do? All the great stuff they've done. Is that going to bail them out? Is that going to save them? All the things they've learned from Jesus. They've spent the last 3 years with him. Is that going to come to their rescue? Hey, as soon as this happens, you need to do this, 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 and this. Is that going to help them? Jesus knows it's not. And in the midst of it all, his answer for them is right under their noses. It's right under our noses as we read this story. And I guarantee you, a few hours from now, when Peter's going through a very dark time, a dark night of the soul, he's going to remember this line from Jesus. This is what Jesus says, after I have risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. You're all going to fall away. No, we're not. You're all going to abandon me. No, we're not. After I have risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. After I have risen. Are you listening, Peter? Are you listening, disciples? Are we listening to what Jesus is saying there? In the darkest moment in the history of the world that's right around the corner, Jesus is giving hope, and it is a dark moment. Jesus is going to get arrested. They are going to flee. They are going to abandon. We're told this. Jesus is going to be denied. Jesus is going to be put on trial with false accusations, and then he is going to be killed. And what is it that he wants them to hang their hopes on? And when Jesus says this, it struck me, this looks like a window into Christ's soul as well, into his own psyche. When Jesus is facing this, Jesus knows what's going to happen, and Jesus knows what's coming. What is it that Jesus himself is hanging his hat on? What is he looking forward to? What is the moment that keeps him going all the way to the cross? It's his resurrection. And if it's true for Jesus, it's got to be true for his disciples. It's true for us as well. After his resurrection, he's going ahead of them to Galilee. Going ahead of. That's triumphant language. That's processional language. Going ahead of. Preparation. Provision. Galilee becomes a place of renewal, restoration, reconciliation, forgiveness. And we read about it in the pages following. That's exactly what happens. Galilee is where salvation will happen. And so in the midst of impending catastrophic failure, Jesus gives them a promise. After I am risen, I am going ahead of you to Galilee. When everything looks dark, when everything looks bleak, when we are tempted to go nuclear, We hang on to this promise. We latch onto it for dear life. Christ's resurrection, Christ's salvation, Christ's restoration for us. You know what Jesus is saying here? After I've risen, I'm going to go ahead of you to Galilee. You know what? This catastrophic failure that's coming, this leaving me, this abandonment and everything that you're going to feel, everything that you're going to experience in those dark moments, it's not the end. The resurrection's the end. Whatever is bleak and whatever is dark, that's not the end. That's not what's final. There's something else. Your failure. Your failure does not define you. What looks like the end is not the end. Yes, there's going to be failure for these disciples. Yes, there's going to be abandonment. Yes, there is going to be denial. Yes, there's going to be a death for Jesus, but it's not the end. It's never the end with Jesus. There's always Galilee. There's always the resurrection for the disciples and for us. You know, what's fascinating to me about the video that we just watched, that right there, 150,000. It's the world's oldest ongoing cemetery. And like the video said, there are princes there, there are prophets buried there, there are famous rabbis that are buried there, there's a Nobel laureate there, Prime Minister Menachem Begin is there. They're all waiting for the resurrection. That's not a picture of death, that's a picture of hope. It's what Jesus has said, I am the resurrection. And in the dark moment for the disciples, Jesus is painting them this picture. This is not the end. There is going to be a resurrection. So, what does it mean for us? I was talking with Troy earlier. It doesn't seem like the COVID moment is going away anytime soon. It doesn't feel like there's going to be an end. And you know what? It is being extended. 2021 is turning out, in some ways, as bad or worse than 2020. But even COVID has an end. Oh, it may not end like we want it to, but the promise that Jesus gives his disciples is a promise for us. Whatever it is, that visa bill, those attempts to reconcile your family, those attempts to save your business, whatever it is that grips you, depression, there's an end to all this. There's an end in Jesus. There's an end in the resurrection. And the amazing thing about the way we are gathered here this morning, you understand that the resurrection has happened for us already. We're here. The idea that we have gathered on this morning to celebrate Jesus tells us that his resurrection continues. His resurrection continues to give us life, continues to give us hope. This right here, this means it's not the end. So whatever's going on in our lives, whatever you face this week, however impossible it seems, and it may be impossible, Christ promises to be with us, and Christ promises that there will be an end to this. Christ is always about the new beginning. The new beginning in our life and the new beginning that someday we will see when we see him face to face. That's his promise for all of us. Christ always brings us a new beginning. After I have risen. He has risen. He did go ahead to Galilee, where for those disciples who had experienced the darkest of times, they experienced in Galilee renewed hope, restoration, reconciliation, salvation. It's all there for them because he did rise. And that promise for them is our promise today. Whatever you're going through, he's risen. He's been to Galilee. And he brings you life and salvation in your moment. Let's pray. Jesus, so thankful for those times that we have abandoned you, and that is way too often. Way too often in the past week, in thoughts and actions, I abandon you. And in the coming week, when life presses in, remind us of this promise that whatever we're going through, it's not the end. We're going to be tempted to push the panic button and go nuclear. I pray that in that moment, this promise carries us, motivates us, gives us life. And then even when we do hit that button, there is forgiveness and there is grace from you because you died and you rose. Thank you. In your name I pray. Amen.